Chris and I had a manifesto before we started working on Fundamental of what we wanted the album to be. It was going to be very electronic, sort of a reaction from Release. We'd also been through the nag electro clash thing, and when we'd even done remixes for other bands like Atomizer and Yoko Ono, and that had got played at nag. And so that's what we decided to do with this album. We then, of course, don't really write that album. We do something that's much bigger sounding. As we mentioned earlier on, we brought out a greatest hits album where you had to have a single. One of the strategies for that, suggested by Chris, was that Diane Warren should write a song for us, because she writes lots of hit songs. And so Diane Warren gave us this song called Numb. And Trevor Horn had just had a big hit with Tattoo, #1 hit around the world. And we'd worked with Trevor in the 80s, but we hadn't worked with him since. And we'd always wanted to make a Trevor Horn album. So Numb didn't become a single for the greatest hits. We kept it. Trevor produced it, and it sounded great. And so we then decided, when we'd written a load of songs, to get Trevor to produce the album. So with Fundamental, we had a sort of thematic idea as well as musical idea, that the album was going to be like a picture of the world in 2006, where the world was getting more paranoid in the wake of 9/11. We've had the Iraq War, Tony Blair, and the new Labour agenda it's very much about surveillance. They're trying to put ID cards through, and that was a big political issue for us. And this is the time when all British cities are now full of cameras. I mean, there was a time when it wasn't like that, impossible though it is to remember. And so we wanted to make that a theme of the album. And it is, so the album starts with psychological, which is just about fear, and sort of aimless, generalized fear that is used to sort of fuel a political agenda sometimes. You've got the song I Was Stupid, about the relationship between George W. Bush and Tony Blair. The final song, Integral, is about sort of controlling state. Again, it's inspired by the whole ID cards issue. And so there's a song, Indefinite Leave to Remain, which is kind of about immigration, inspired by the fact that if you get permission to stay in Britain, you get a form called Indefinite Leave to Remain. So it's actually Pet Shop Boys' most directly political album, this. But obviously there are other songs, strange songs like Casanova and Hell, which is inspired by a book about Casanova. My favourite track on the album, the song I Made My Excuses and Left. That started off with a sample of Chris singing into his phone.
Oh, God, I was just walking along and that came in my head, and I don't know, because I wouldn't normally do that.
So we sampled from Chris's phone, Chris singing this, and wrote this piece of music around it. And then I'd written this lyric as a poem. I made my excuses and left. And I think Chris set it to music. Mm. And then it went back into the Chris vocal sample bit. And then I suddenly thought of an end to give it an optimistic end, because it was so miserable. And the song itself, though, was inspired, the story was inspired by John Lennon's first wife, Cynthia Lennon. I was obviously reading a book about it. And she comes back from holiday with friends, and she goes into their house, and John's sitting on the sofa with Yoko. And she's all bubbly and says, oh, we're going to go and have dinner in London or something. And she realises it's all over, and it's a very poignant, she wrote her memoirs, that's why. It's a very poignant moment in her memoirs, and so I used that as a story. I already had the title. Yeah, it's an interesting song, because it's got 3 different parts to it. So it's our second consistent album in a row. We decided to make it a big Trevor Horn production, which we've always wanted to do anyway. And we seem to have the right songs for that, like I Was Stupid, Luna Park, and Trevor likes the songs, and so that's what we do. And it takes quite a long time to make, not that long by Trevor's standards. It took probably 6 months or so. And I think he did a great job. I mean, I think almost every track's got an orchestra on it, pretty much every track. It's got a very rich sound. It's a very, very detailed production. Trevor has friends that come in, like Lol Cream, who's been 10cc, comes in and sings backing vocals. And also we had a lot of fun making it with Trevor. By this point we've got a little studio in London that we write in as well. One of the first songs I wrote of this album was this song called The Performance of My Life. Someone had given us a stylophone, this electronic musical instrument that David Bowie plays on Space Oddity. And we were fiddling around with that. Anyway, we wrote the song Performance of My Life, and I said we both agreed actually, it's too camp for us. But it was sort of inspired by working with Liza Minnelli and about how divas like that put their entire life into their performance and their performance into their life. And the two are sort of indivisible in a way. So we demoed it, and then several years later, David Arnold, the producer and film composer, phoned me up and said, we're doing an album with Shirley Bassey, would you like to write a song for her? And I said, we've got it, I'll send it to you now. and I emailed it to him, and he phoned me and said, I can't believe you got this song. I said, no, it's just amazing, because it's perfect for her. And the version he did and Shirley Bassey sang is really wonderful, I think. Our version sounds a bit like, what's that comedy programme set in Northern Nightclub?
Phoenix Night?
Phoenix.
Nights.
That's what it makes me think of.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like it's in a working men's club or something. It's got the little drum machine behind it. Towards the end of this period, we were asked to write songs, amazingly, if we had anything, to write songs for Kylie by Parlophone, and also by Madonna. Madonna's management actually said, have you got anything she could work with? And so, in my house in Durham, we had a couple of weeks where we wrote songs for Kylie. Most of them, unfortunately, aren't of master quality. And for Madonna, well, we didn't really write any finished songs, I don't think, because she'd asked for something she could work with.
Wait, there's a good song in that group. Did we ever record it?
We recorded, this is one song, Pandemonium,
No.
which goes on the album, the next album, yes. And there's another song called A Certain Je ne sais quoi,
No.
which we do later.
No, there's a good song for Madonna. Well,
Oh, we've never done it though.
I know, well, I'm just saying, what is it?
Oh, it's not on this either.
There is actually a good song out of all of this.
And it's not finished. My Side of the Story, it's called.
Right.
I've always quite liked writing for different personas. So if you're writing for Kylie, you think you're trying to pretend you're Kylie. We wrote a song called You're the Exception That Proves the Rule. Because Kylie was touring and she was doing like I Should Be So Lucky as a 20s thing or something. So we wrote sort of 20s, but it went into the ballet, went into The Most Incredible Thing as the competition. Ring Road was written very early on in this album. Actually, the lyric was slightly inspired. Believe it or not, we went to Milton Keynes to see Eminem play. And I'd never been to Milton Keynes before. And it's sort of all ring roads, isn't it? With sort of, very leafy though. I actually quite like Milton Keynes. And so it's about two kids driving around in a car, sort of snogging in a lay-by. There was a group or a duo in this period called West End Girls from Sweden who only recorded Pet Shop Boys songs. And we gave this song to them, I think. I can't remember where they recorded it. It's the lyric you could imagine Brett Anderson singing, but not the musical style. It's got that sort of gasoline, Vaseline feel about it that we've always liked. On the Further Listening album, again, you can see there's a sort of experimental thing going on. There's a song called Enfant Terrible that's very sort of aggressive musically. The former Enfant Terrible, about a rock star making the tricky transition to National Treasure, and it's quite experimental sounding, I think. Girls Don't Cry simply came about by watching the film Boys Don't Cry. I was watching it and I got an idea, a very obvious sort of melody, whatever girls say, boys don't cry. So I changed it to whatever boys say, girls don't cry. And then made a little story about someone running. Actually, I like that song. It's a girl running away and she's actually murdered her boyfriend. We sort of don't know really what the motive is. But she's quite hard and she's going to establish a new life somewhere. I think people underestimate how enjoyable a lot of this stuff is. When we do like remixes of things, We do remix of the form Enfant Terrible. We do remix of I'm a Stupid, which is on this. You know, it's fun, really. I think it's difficult to judge how interesting people are going to think your music is. We always sort of fight against the idea that because you've been around for a long time, you're just going through the motions now, because we're not, and we never have done. But there's a sort of cynical expectation, actually by the public almost, that you'll just be going through the motions. I don't know if anyone, any artists who carry on working feel like they're going through the motions. I think they probably don't. But there's a sort of, with pop musicians, because pop music is a young person's musical form in theory, and yet it's populated by a lot of older people, there's always a certain level of cynicism, I think, by the way it can be greeted. You know, haven't you made enough money yet, and all that kind of stuff. But I think with us, and probably a lot of other artists, but I think with us, the impetus is creative, and then the rest is sort of dealing with that.